A 9-year-old boy, barefoot and bloody, stumbles onto a desolate highway. His feet are bleeding. He sprints past 7 bikers as if they're ghosts, his eyes fixed only on their president. He latches onto Reaper's vest, his small hands like claws. "You have to come," he gasps. "She won't wake up, and they said they were coming back." Welcome to Blissful Whispers. We are so glad you are here for this story. We have an amazing community watching from all over the world. Let us know in the comments, where are you watching from and what time is it for you? And if you want to find out what Reaper does next, make sure you hit that like button and subscribe right now. The roar of 8 V-twin engines was the only sound that mattered for the last 100 miles. It was a mechanical heartbeat pounding against the oppressive silence of US Route 50, the loneliest road in America. Silas Reaper Stone felt every one of those miles in his spine. The setting sun painted the high desert sky in strokes of bruised purple and blood orange, but the beauty was lost on him. He was tired. Not just road-weary, but a deep, bone-settled exhaustion that came from 10 straight hours in the saddle. The Road Sentinels Motorcycle Club had just wrapped their annual POW, MIA benefit ride, a grueling 2-day trek that had raised thousands but cost them in sweat and stamina. Now all Reaper wanted was a cold beer at a dive bar 2 towns over and a bed that didn't vibrate. His knuckles, wrapped around the handlebars of his Harley, were stiff. Behind him he could hear the distinct rhythm of the 7 other bikes in his club. His family. Grizz, their massive enforcer, was probably half asleep. Milo Doc was likely calculating how much ibuprofen he'd need. And Keegan Ghost, his vice president, was as always watching their 6. They were a wall of leather and steel, a self-contained unit that trusted nothing but the man in front of them. Reaper was about to signal for a rest stop when he saw it. A flicker. To his right, where the dense Nevada pine forest met the gravel shoulder, something small darted between the trees. His first thought was deer. His hand instinctively covered the brake. But deer don't wear t-shirts. Brake. Reaper's voice was a gravelly bark, cutting through the engine's thunder. The formation shattered. 8 motorcycles, a combined weight of over 6,000 pounds, came to a grinding, shuddering halt. Tires spat gravel. Chrome groaned in protest. Dust and exhaust plumed in the twilight, thick as smoke. "What the hell, Reaper?" Ghost's bike slid to a stop beside him, his voice a low, suspicious rasp. Ghost was all sharp angles and paranoid energy, the club's necessary shadow. "I didn't see anything." Reaper didn't answer. He was already off his bike before the engine fully settled, his heavy boots hitting the asphalt. He pulled off his helmet, the cool evening air a shock against his sweaty skin. His gray-streaked beard was matted, his eyes scanning the tree line. "There," he said just as the figure stumbled out of the shadows. It wasn't an ambush. It wasn't a threat. It was a boy. He couldn't have been more than 9 years old. He was barefoot, his small feet bloody and torn by the rocks and pine needles. His face was a mask of dirt and tears, snot running into his mouth. His clothes were ripped. He stood frozen for 1 second, his chest heaving, his eyes wide and white in the dusk, staring at the 8 leather-clad giants and their monstrous machines. Then he ran. Not away. To them. The boy, Nolan, scrambled straight for Reaper, his hands grabbing the front of Reaper's patched vest. His colors, with a strength that was pure panic. He didn't seem to register the skulls, the patches, or the intimidating presence of the men surrounding him. He just saw help. "Please," the boy shrieked, his voice cracking. "Please, you have to follow me. My mom, she won't wake up." Reaper, a man who had faced down rival clubs and prison guards without flinching, was frozen by the raw terror in that small voice. The other sentinels were off their bikes now, forming a silent, wary semicircle. Reaper knelt, his knees popping, his leather jacket groaning. He put his hands gently on the boy's shoulders. "Slow down, son. You're safe. What's wrong with your mom? She won't wake up." Nolan sobbed, shaking him. "I tried. I shook her, and she's cold. Please, you have to come now." Ghost stepped forward, his hand resting near the butt of the pistol holstered on his hip. "Reaper," he said, his voice low and urgent. "This stinks. A kid out of nowhere? Middle of US 50? It's a setup. Classic ambush." "He's barefoot, Ghost," Reaper murmured, his eyes locked on the boy's bleeding feet. "So he plays his part well," Ghost shot back, his gaze sweeping the dark woods. We're tired, we're exposed, and I don't like this one bit. We call it in. Let the local sheriff handle it. We ride on. She won't wake up. Nolan screamed again, pulling at Reaper's vest, his small knuckles white. He said they'd come back. Please. That one line hit Reaper like a physical blow. He said they'd come back. This wasn't an accident. Reaper looked at Ghost, his VP's logical, cynical warning hanging in the air. Ghost was right. This was stupid. This was reckless. This was how you got your club killed. Then he looked back at Nolan. The boy was shaking so hard his teeth chattered. He wasn't acting. This was the ragged edge of a child's world ending. Reaper had spent a lifetime making hard calls, most of them selfish. He'd lived by a code that put his club above all else. But this was something else. Where's home, kid? Reaper asked, his voice leaving no room for argument. Nolan pointed frantically down a nearly invisible, unpaved service road that disappeared into the blackness of the pines. It's not far. Down the path. Please, I think she's... He couldn't say the word. Reaper stood up. The decision was made. He looked at his VP. Ghost, you're on point with me. Grizz, you take the rear. Everyone else, file in. Lights on high. Hands ready. We don't know what we're riding into. Ghost stared at his president for a long, hard second. He saw the iron in Reaper's eyes. He cursed under his breath, but he nodded. You're the president. Let's ride. He swung his leg back over his bike, his hand never leaving his hip. Reaper turned back to Nolan, scooping the boy up in one motion. Nolan weighed nothing. He settled the boy on the tank of his Harley, slotting him between his arms. Hold on tight, son, Reaper commanded, his voice a low rumble that vibrated through the boy's small frame. Show us the way. He kicked his engine back to life. The Harley roared, a sound of thunder in the dying light. One by one the other 7 bikes followed. The road sentinels, 8 men who trusted no one, turned off the safety of the highway and followed a 9-year-old child into the dark. The service road was a scar, not a path. It was a choked, rutted track that fought them for every inch. The Harleys, built for open asphalt, bucked and fishtailed in the loose gravel. Tree branches, skeletal in the high beams, scraped at their leather and chrome like claws. Nolan, perched on Reaper's tank, pointed with a trembling, dirty finger. It's just past this bend. Hurry. Ghost rode point, his head on a constant swivel, his headlight beams sweeping the dense treeline. Every dark shadow looked like an ambush. Every snap of a twig under their tires sounded like a gunshot. This was wrong. The air was heavy, isolated, and smelled of damp earth and something acrid, like old fear. They were riding blind into a trap, and every instinct Ghost had screamed at him to turn back. But Reaper was right behind him, a small boy clinging to his vest, and the club followed its president. There. Nolan shouted. That's it. The headlights of 8 bikes converged on the house, painting it in a harsh, interrogative glare. It was a low, single-story ranch house that had given up. The yard was a chest-high tangle of dead weeds. A child's tricycle lay on its side, rusted and missing a wheel. But it was the front door that held their attention. It was splintered, hanging crookedly off one hinge, a gaping black mouth where the lock and part of the frame used to be. It hadn't just been opened, it had been violated. Bikes running. Stay sharp, Reaper commanded, swinging his leg off his Harley. He lifted Nolan to the ground. Doc, Grizz, you're with me. Ghost, you've got the line. Watch our backs. Reaper didn't bother knocking. He put his boot to the splintered wood and pushed. The door shrieked, dragging a long, ugly scar across the floorboards. The smell hit them first. Stale air, spoiled food, mildew, and the faint, metallic tang of old blood. Mom? Nolan screamed, ducking under Reaper's arm and sprinting into the darkness. Mom, I brought help. Kid, wait. Reaper lunged after him, his flashlight beam cutting through the gloom. The living room was a disaster. It wasn't just messy, it had been torn apart with a vindictive, focused rage. Couch cushions were slashed, their stuffing pulled out. A flat-screen TV had been ripped from the wall, leaving dangling cables and a fresh hole in the drywall. In here. In the kitchen. Reaper, Doc, and Grizz followed the boy's voice. They found her. Delilah, the boy's mother, was crumpled on the kitchen floor between an overturned chair and the refrigerator. She was young, maybe late 20s, but looked pale and broken as old porcelain. Her dark hair was matted with dried blood from a nasty gash on her temple. "Clear!" Doc yelled, dropping to his knees. His voice changed instantly, shedding the biker's drawl, replaced by the clipped, precise tone of the Navy corpsman he'd once been. "Reaper, get my trauma kit. It's in the left saddlebag. Go." As Reaper bolted outside, Doc's hands were already at work. He brushed the hair from the wound, his fingers probing her neck. Pulse is thready. Weak. Breathing is shallow. He gently lifted one of her eyelids. Pupils are unequal. That's blunt force trauma. She's hypothermic too. He stripped off his own heavy leather vest and draped it over her, trying to preserve what little warmth she had. "Where's your sister, Nolan?" Reaper asked, returning with the kit. Nolan was shaking, his eyes glued to his unmoving mother. Zoe? She hides. When he got mad, she always hides." "Grizz," Reaper ordered. The club's enforcer, a mountain of a man who looked like he could punch through a brick wall, nodded. His massive frame moved with a surprising, quiet grace. He began to sweep the small house, his heavy boots thudding softly on the floor. "Not in the bedrooms," his voice rumbled from the hallway. The scene was the same in there. Drawers ripped out, clothes scattered, mattresses flipped. "Closets are clear." Grizz returned to the kitchen, his brow furrowed. He scanned the room, his eyes passing over the wreckage. Then he saw it. A pantry door slightly ajar. He didn't open it. He just stood by it and spoke, his voice as gentle as he could make it. "Hey, little one. It's okay. We're the good guys. We're here to help your mom." Silence. He nudged the door open with one finger. "Reaper." His voice was low and it held a new kind of horror. Reaper joined him, shining his light inside. In the back, huddled behind a toppled 50-pound sack of flour that had split open, was a little girl. Zoe. She was 6 years old, wearing only a dirty nightshirt, her knees pulled to her chest. Her eyes were wide, staring forward, but she wasn't seeing them. She was completely, terrifyingly still. "Hey, sweetheart," Grizz murmured, kneeling. The floor groaned under his weight. He slowly reached out one massive tattooed hand. "We got you." She didn't blink. Didn't flinch. Didn't even breathe, it seemed. "She's in shock," Doc said, never looking up from Delilah. "Catatonic. Get her warm, Grizz. No. Get her out of there." Grizz carefully scooped the little girl up. She was rigid like a store mannequin. He cradled her against his massive chest, her small head fitting into his palm. He sat on the floor, enclosing her in his arms and the warmth of his body, rocking her gently, whispering wordless, soothing sounds. "Reaper," Doc said, his voice tight. "We have to move her. She's not going to last. She needs a hospital." Reaper turned to Nolan, his face grim. "Nolan, talk to me. Who did this?" It was Dad," Nolan whispered, tears finally breaking free and cutting clean paths through the grime on his face. He's a gambler. He lost everything." The story came out in broken pieces. The father weighed. The screaming fights. And then for days ago he just left. He took the truck. He took everything. "But who did this, Nolan?" Reaper pressed. "Who hurt your mom?" "The men," Nolan choked. "The men Dad owed. They came yesterday. 2 of them. They kicked in the door. They wanted money." His voice was small. "Mom told them we didn't have any. She begged them to leave us alone. They hadn't. They tore the house apart looking for anything of value. They slashed the furniture looking for hidden cash. They went to Zoe's room," Nolan said, his voice cracking. "She was hiding under her bed. They found her tablet. The one Grandma got her. It was all she had left. And the man, he took it." Nolan's face crumpled. He laughed. He said it was interest. Zoe was screaming and he just laughed and put it in his bag. Reaper's gloved hands, stained with engine grease and road grime, clenched into fists so tight his knuckles turned white. The image, a grown man, a predator, stealing a terrified child's only toy and laughing, ignited a cold, primal rage in his gut. It was a line. A line that wasn't just crossed, but obliterated. This was a level of predatory cruelty that had to be answered. Don't let predators like that win. If you agree that preying on the weak is disgusting, hit that like button. Only people who support bullies would ignore this. This is the kind of evil that can't be allowed to stand. Reaper knew it. Ghost, standing in the doorway, his face a mask of stone, knew it. Even Grizz, rocking the empty shell of a little girl, knew it. When did your mom hit her head? Reaper asked, his voice now dangerously quiet. The man, the one who laughed, Nolan whispered. Mom tried to stop him. He was taking the last of our food from the fridge. She just grabbed his arm. And he shoved her. He shoved her so hard. She fell back, and her head hit the fireplace. Nolan pointed to the stone hearth. She didn't get up. And they just left. They left us. Nolan looked up at Reaper, his eyes a bottomless pit of a 9-year-old who had seen the absolute worst of the world. I waited all night. I kept talking to her, but she got so cold. I had to find someone. You did good, son, Reaper said, his voice thick. He turned to document. Can you get a signal? Doc held up his phone. Nothing. Not a single bar. Reaper, we can't wait for an ambulance that we can't even call. We have to move her ourselves. Now. She can't ride a bike, Grizz rumbled, his eyes still on Zoe. We don't have a truck, Reaper said. He looked at the splintered door, then at the sturdy, undamaged doors of the bedrooms. A grim heart plan formed. Ghost. Get back out here. I need a drill and a saw from the toolkit. We're making a damn stretcher. The makeshift stretcher, a solid core bedroom door, slammed through the double-glass entrance of the High Rock Rural Clinic. We need a doctor. Now. Reaper's voice boomed through the small, sterile waiting room. A nurse at the front desk looked up, her eyes widening in terror. 8 massive leather-clad men, bloody-knuckled and smeared with dirt and engine grime, had just invaded her quiet lobby. Grizz, carrying a small, still child, looked like a nightmare. Reaper and Ghost, carrying the door, looked like they were hauling a body. Security, the nurse fumbled for a phone. We don't need security, we need a goddamn doctor. Doc snapped, pushing past them. Female, late 20s, blunt force trauma to the right temporal, unequal pupils, severe hypothermia, thready pulse. She's unconscious. She needs a C-spine collar and a full workup now. The authority in his voice cut through the panic. A woman in blue scrubs with a stethoscope and tired, intelligent eyes, Dr. Alani, emerged from a back room, taking in the scene. She didn't flinch. Get her in trauma 1, she commanded the nurse. Get me a line, get the warming blankets, and get a crash cart. You, she pointed at Doc, you sound like you know what you're doing. What's her name? Delilah, Nolan supplied, his voice a small squeak. You, she pointed at Reaper, stay out here with the kids. The rest of you back in the lobby. You, she looked back at Doc, you're with me? Give me the report. The bikers, for the first time in their lives, were completely out of their element. They were men of action, of open roads and blunt force, reduced to pacing uselessly under the hum of fluorescent lights and the smell of antiseptic. Reaper found himself in a plastic chair, Nolan pressed against his side. Grizz sat in another, Zoe still held fast against his chest, her eyes wide and blank. Ghost just stood by the door, watching, his hand never far from his hip. An hour crawled by. Every time a door opened, Nolan would jump. Finally, Doc and Dr. Alani emerged. Doc had shed his leather vest. He looked more like a medic than a biker. She's stable, Dr. Alani said, her voice quiet but firm. Doc's field care was textbook. He stabilized her spine and kept her from sliding further into hypothermia. We're treating her for a severe concussion, acute malnutrition, and dehydration. She's lucky. Another few hours. She let the thought hang. Reaper let out a breath he didn't know he was holding. She's gonna be okay. He looked at Nolan. You hear that, kid? She's okay. A small, watery smile broke through the grime on Nolan's face. It was the first time they'd seen it. She's not conscious yet, Dr. Alani continued, but her vitals are improving. You men, you saved her life. You saved those children. Reaper felt a strange, unfamiliar flicker of pride. We just did what anyone would do. Dr. Alani's expression tightened. Which brings us to the hard part, Mr. Stone, Reaper supplied. Silas Stone. Mr. Stone. As a doctor in this state, I am a mandatory reporter. Reaper's good feeling vanished. A reporter? We just told you what happened. You need to call the cops. We can give a description of the men who did this. I did call the sheriff, she said. But that's not the call I had to make. I've also contacted Child Protective Services. They're sending an investigator. The words hit Reaper like a splash of ice water. CPS? What? You see what happened? They're the victims here. Their house was robbed. Delilah was attacked. Dr. Alani sighed, pinching the bridge of her nose. You don't understand the system, Mr. Stone. I don't report why it happened. I report what I see. And what I see is a mother who cannot care for her children. I see two minors, one malnourished and the other in catatonic shock, found in an abandoned, unsafe home. The reason, the gambling, the father, the enforcers, it doesn't matter to the state. Only the immediate fact. These children are not safe. Reaper's blood ran cold. He saw it instantly, a new, invisible antagonist. Not a man with a gun but a process. A set of cold, hard rules that was about to punish this family for being victims. Dr. Alani continued, her voice devoid of emotion. The investigator will assess the home, which you've described as ransacked and without food. They will assess the mother, who is incapacitated. They will find no legal guardian present. She looked at Nolan, then back at Reaper. The state will take them into temporary protective custody. It's not a choice. It's a flowchart. Tired of heartless rules that hurt kids? Reaper could feel a rage building that was hotter than any bar fight. This wasn't justice. It was an abduction by flowchart. Comment family first below if you believe keeping Nolan and Zoe together is the only right answer. The system was about to fail them all over again, and Reaper was the only one who saw it coming. They'll be placed in foster care, she finished. Given their different ages and Zoe's special needs, they will almost certainly be separated. No. It wasn't a word, it was a raw scream. Nolan, who had been listening from his chair, launched himself at Reaper, his small arms wrapping around the biker's waist like a vice. No. You can't let them. You can't, he sobbed, his face buried in Reaper's leather vest. They'll take Zoe. They'll send us away. That's what they did to my friend at school. He never saw his sister again. Please. You promised you'd help. You promised. The sterile quiet of the clinic was shattered. The nurse was staring. Doc looked like he'd been punched. Grizz's grip on the still silent Zoe tightened, his knuckles white. All eyes were on Reaper. He was holding a hysterical, sobbing child who was clinging to him as the last stable thing in his universe. Dr. Alani looked on with a pained, professional pity. Mr. Stone, there's nothing you can do. It's the law. Reaper looked over Nolan's head, his eyes locking with the doctor's. The cold, quiet fury in his gaze made her take an involuntary step back. He wasn't asking for permission. He wasn't negotiating. He gently pried Nolan off his vest and knelt, putting his hands on the boy's shoulders. He waited until Nolan's sobs quieted enough to meet his eyes. Look at me, son, Reaper said, his voice a low, steady rumble that cut through the fear. I told you we'd help. I told you. We're not going anywhere. He stood up, his gaze sweeping over his club. Doc, you're on the kids. Grizz, you're on the door. Ghost, you're with me. We're going to meet this investigator. He looked back at Dr. Alani. You did your job. Now we're going to do ours. He turned to Nolan. We stay. For an hour, the clinic's waiting room was a silent pressure cooker. The road sentinels, 8 men built for the open air and the rumble of engines, were trapped in a sterile white box. The hum of the fluorescent lights was maddening. Grizz hadn't moved. Zoe was still a silent, rigid weight in his arms. Nolan refused to let go of Reaper's hand. The rest of the club paced like caged animals or sat stiffly in plastic chairs they were too big for, their leather creaking in the silence. The automatic doors slid open with a pneumatic hiss. The woman who entered was the physical opposite of the men waiting. She was in her late 40s, her hair pulled back in a severe bun. She wore a drab blazer, sensible shoes, and a look of profound, bone-deep weariness. She wasn't intimidated by the wall of leather. She looked annoyed, as if they were just one more piece of unpleasantness in a day full of it. In her hand she carried a clipboard. It wasn't a prop. She held it like a weapon. This was Miss Price. She bypassed the bikers entirely, walking straight to the admin desk where Dr. Alani was waiting. They spoke in low, professional tones. Reaper watched as Dr. Alani gestured toward his group, her expression pained. Miss Price just nodded, her face impassive, and made a note on her clipboard. Then she turned. She walked directly to Reaper, her eyes flat and assessing. Which one of you is Mr. Stone? Her voice was as sharp and colorless as the room. Reaper stood, gently moving Nolan behind his leg. I am Silas Stone. We're the ones who found them. So I've been told, Miss Price said. She didn't thank him. I'm Karen Price, Child Protective Services. I've spoken with Dr. Alani and I've reviewed Sheriff Brody's preliminary report. I've also, in the interest of expediency, run the license plates on every motorcycle in your convoy. A cold stillness fell over the group. Ghost, who had been leaning against the wall, stood up straight. You're the road sentinels, she stated. It wasn't a question. Not exactly a community outreach program. She flipped a page on her clipboard. Her gaze was sharp. Silas Reaper, Stone. 1 conviction, aggravated assault, 2005. Served 2 years at High Desert. She didn't wait for a reply. Her eyes shifted to Ghost. Keegan Ghost Riley. 1 conviction, felony theft, 2009. 18 months. I can continue, Mr. Stone. I see a pattern of disorderly conduct, resisting arrest, and various misdemeanors that paint a very clear picture. The picture you're missing, Ghost's voice was a low growl, is the one of us carrying that woman in here on a door. The picture you're missing is what those kids looked like when we found them. I am missing nothing, Mr. Riley, she snapped. I have the photographs from the scene. It's a miracle those children are alive. Which is why I am here to secure them. Secure them? Reaper's voice dropped, the temperature in the room dropping with it. They're not cargo. No, Miss Price agreed, her voice hard. They are minors in acute, immediate danger. Their home is a crime scene. Their mother is incapacitated. They have no legal guardian. By the authority of the state, I am taking them into protective custody. Now. No. Nolan's voice, muffled from behind Reaper's leg, was panicked. No, you can't. We won't go. You can't take us. Miss Price's gaze dropped to the boy. For a fraction of a second, her expression flickered, a flash of pity, but it was gone as quickly as it came, replaced by the mask of the system. Son, this isn't a discussion. This is for your safety. The hell it is, Reaper said, his voice a low rumble. You'll take them, split them up, and throw them into the system. They've been through enough. A possibility, Miss Price conceded coldly. But it is a better alternative than leaving them in the care of this. She gestured to the entire club, her distaste obvious. I told the boy we'd stay, Reaper said. We're his support network. Miss Price actually let out a short, bitter laugh. You? The support network? The state does not and will not recognize an outlaw motorcycle club as a viable placement. You are not what this family needs. The words hung in the air, sharp as glass. You are not what this family needs. She was looking at Reaper, but she was judging every man in that room. She was judging Grizz for the tattoos on his knuckles while he gently held a traumatized child. She was judging Doc for the patch on his back, not the life he had just saved. She was a gatekeeper, a living embodiment of a system that looks at a person's worst day, that 1 conviction from 2005, and decides that's all they'll ever be. It's a soul-crushing judgment, the kind that stops good people from even trying. If you're sick of people being judged by their past instead of their actions, hit that subscribe button. Only judgmental gatekeepers who think they know everything would refuse. Reaper held her gaze, refusing to be dismissed. Try us. Miss Price stared at him, a long, calculating silence stretching between them. She saw the iron in his eyes. She saw the 7 men standing behind him. She was a veteran of this system. She knew when she was facing a brick wall. And she knew how to dismantle one. Fine, she said, her voice clipped. You want to play savior? You want to be the support network, and stop me from doing my job? You have 48 hours. 48 hours for what? She clicked her pen. 1. The home. It's uninhabitable. I need it brought to code. That means a secured, locking front door, running hot water, no hazards, and food in the pantry. And I don't mean a case of beer and a bag of jerky, Mr. Stone. I mean milk, bread, and vegetables. 2. The mother. She's incapacitated and uninsured. When she wakes up, she will require extensive trauma counseling and psychiatric evaluation for depression and neglect. You will fund it. The state will not. 3. You. Her eyes swept over all of them. Every single man who intends to have unsupervised contact with these children will submit to a full, comprehensive, national background check. Tonight. I'll have the forms sent over from the sheriff's office. Any new felonies, any active warrants, any domestic violence charges, and this deal is dead. She flipped a page. And 4, a safety plan. I want a written, detailed, hour-by-hour plan for how you will provide 24/7 care. Who cooks? Who cleans? Who is with them at all times? How will you protect them from the men who did this? She looked up, her face a mask of cold bureaucracy. You get me all of that in 48 hours. You fail on one point, a dirty floor, a missed signature, and I will be back with 2 sheriff's deputies and I will take those children. It's an impossible list. It's designed for you to fail. Am I understood? The silence was heavy. The terms were staggering. It wasn't a chance. It was a death sentence. Ghost looked at Reaper, his face pale. Reaper, that's insane. We can't. Understood, Reaper said, cutting him off. His voice was flat, devoid of emotion. Miss Price's eyebrows shot up. She had expected them to yell, to threaten, to posture. She had not expected this quiet, absolute compliance. You think you can do that? I said we're staying. Reaper didn't blink. He turned to his club, his voice now the familiar bark of a president giving orders. Doc, you're on the medical. Get with Alani. Find out what Delilah needs. We'll find the money. He looked at Ghost. You're on the house. Take Grizz and 2 others. I want a supply list in 30 minutes and that house rebuilt by tomorrow night. Door, windows, locks, everything. He looked at the remaining men. You're on the checks. We go to the sheriff's office tonight. We sign whatever they put in front of us. He turned back to Miss Price, who was watching this, stunned. Send the forms. We'll be ready. Miss Price stared at him for a long moment, her professional mask wavering. She'd just thrown an impossible bureaucratic mountain at them, and they were already splitting it up. 48 hours, Mr. Stone, she said, regaining her composure. The clock is running. She turned and walked out, her heels clicking on the linoleum. The second the door hissed shut, Doc let out a breath. Reaper, a house to code and private psychiatric care? That's tens of thousands of dollars. We don't have that. Reaper looked down at Nolan, who was staring up at him, his small face etched with a desperate, fragile hope. We'll get it, Reaper said. Ghost, get the list. We've got work to do. The ride back from the clinic was a silent, high-speed run. There was no casual formation, just a desperate race against a 48-hour clock. When the 8 bikes skidded to a stop in the weed-choked yard, the sun was just beginning to stain the eastern sky. The ransacked house looked even more pathetic in the gray morning light. Reaper swung off his bike before the engine died. All right, you heard Price. This isn't a house, it's a liability. We've got 47 hours. We don't sleep. We don't stop. We work. The club didn't wait for assignments. They moved as one organism. Ghost, his paranoid energy now laser-focused, began on the perimeter. He wasn't just fixing locks, he was waging war on vulnerability. This door is a joke, he snarled, examining the splintered frame. Grizz, tear it out. All of it. I want a new frame, 4-inch screws, and a steel deadbolt that can stop a battering ram. While Grizz and 2 other bikers attacked the doorway with a crowbar, Ghost stalked the property's edge. He found the weak spots the enforcers had exploited. A broken window in the back, a loose cellar door. This is a kill box, he muttered, pulling out his phone, not to call anyone but to take notes. He established sight lines from the front porch to the road. He set up a 24/7 watch schedule, rotating every 4 hours. His paranoia, once a liability, was now their single greatest asset. He was building a fortress. Inside, the house was a scene of chaos and despair. Grizz, having demolished the old door frame, turned his attention to the wreckage. He was a force of nature. He hauled the slashed, sodden couch out the front door himself. He ripped up the mildewed carpet, exposing the solid wood floor beneath. He and another sentinel measured and replaced the broken window, caulking it tight against the cold. All the while, Grizz worked with an almost impossible tenderness. Zoe was still in his arms. He'd bundled her in a clean sweatshirt from his saddlebag. He moved her to one hip as he measured wood, murmuring to her constantly, "See that? We're fixin' it. It's gonna be safe now, little bit." He found a crumpled, dirty stuffed bear in the wreckage of her room. He gently wiped its face and tucked it into her arms. Her small, thin fingers didn't move, but she didn't drop it. "Milo, Doc," declared the kitchen a biohazard. He tied a bandana over his face, put on rubber gloves and began to sanitize. He was merciless. He emptied the fridge of its rotten, spoiled contents. He filled trash bag after trash bag with molding dishes and garbage. He scrubbed every surface, counters, floors, cupboards, with a bleach solution so strong it stung the eyes. Another 2 bikers had made a supply run. They'd hit a 24-hour hardware store and a supermarket, their saddlebags and arms overflowing. They returned not just with a new steel door, deadbolts, and plywood, but with groceries. This wasn't a bachelor's shopping trip. Doc had given them Miss Price's list, and they'd added to it gallons of milk, eggs, bread, fresh fruit, vegetables, oatmeal, juice. But they also brought things that weren't on the list. New pillows, 2 child-sized sleeping bags, warm blankets, clean towels, and a case of diapers just in case. Nolan sat on the top porch step, his small body dwarfed by the controlled chaos. He watched as these loud, bearded, leather-clad men swarmed his home. They worked with a furious, pounding efficiency. They didn't talk much, just grunted commands. They hauled out the broken pieces of his old life and, in their place, started building something new, something solid. By the time the sun was fully in the sky, the transformation was staggering. The shattered front door was gone, replaced by a solid steel door. The broken window was sealed. The stench of rot was gone, overpowered by bleach and the rich smell of brewing coffee. Doc was in the clean kitchen, making a mountain of scrambled eggs and toast. Reaper stood on the porch, a mug of coffee in his hand. The house was no longer a victim. It was secure. It was clean. It was defended. He took a sip. 40 hours left. Miss Price wanted a safe home. They just built a goddamn fortress. The steel door was in place. The pantry was stocked. The house was a fortress. But it was a fortress under siege from a new enemy. Miss Price's 48-hour deadline was evaporating. They were 30 hours in, and Reaper, Ghost, and Doc stood on the new sturdy front porch, the morning sun doing nothing to warm the cold dread in their chests. I spoke with Dr. Alani, Doc said, his voice flat. He hadn't slept. Delilah's conscious but disoriented. She needs immediate, intensive trauma therapy. Dr. Alani found a specialist in Reno who will work on a sliding scale, but we still need a $5,000 deposit just to start the evaluation. That's before the ongoing treatment. Ghost leaned against the support beam, rubbing his eyes. And Price's deadline for funding is in 18 hours. We've tapped the club treasury. Every man here emptied his wallet for the building supplies and groceries. We're broke, Reaper. Reaper stared out at the weed-choked yard, his jaw tight. They had solved the physical. They had the manpower. But they were beaten by paper. Beaten by a system that ran on cash they didn't have. We're not failing, he said, his voice a low growl. Then what? Ghost shot back. We gonna rob a bank? Reaper's eyes drifted to his motorcycle, its chrome catching the morning light. No, he said, a hard, sharp idea forming. We're gonna ride. He turned to his club, who had gathered in the yard. We've got 18 hours to raise an impossible amount of money. So we're gonna do what we do best. We're gonna make some noise. Wrench, he barked at their youngest member, get on your phone. You're gonna blast this to every club, every charter, every social media page in a 200-mile radius. Sentinels, devils, reapers. I don't care who they ride with. Tell them the road sentinels are calling in a marker. Wrench's fingers were already flying. What's the message, Prez? The Guardian ride, Reaper said, the name hitting him. 10 a.m. Tomorrow. We meet in the town square. This isn't a benefit. This is an emergency. It's for 2 kids. It's for a family the system left to die. Cash only. We're saving them when no one else would. The digital call to arms went out. It was shared once. Then 10 times. Then 100. It was picked up by local bloggers, by other clubs, by citizens in the next county who had heard whispers of what happened on Route 50. The next morning, Reaper rode into the town square expecting maybe 50 bikes. He saw 200. It wasn't just bikers. The entire town had shown up. The owner of the hardware store, who had seen the mountain of supplies they'd bought. Nurses from Dr. Alani's clinic. Local ranchers, families, people who had, for years, crossed the street to avoid the road sentinels. They walked up, one by one, to a lockbox Grizz was guarding. They stuffed in 5s, 20s, 50s, even 100s. They weren't just donating, they were investing. That afternoon, the sentinels sat around the kitchen table in the now-safe house. The table was covered in a mountain of cash. They counted in a stunned silence. 16, 17. Wrench's voice was hoarse. $17,450. It was enough. Enough for the deposit, enough for months of treatment, enough to get Delilah back on her feet. Enough to silence Miss Price. Reaper looked at the pile of money. It was a physical manifestation of community, a testament to the good that happens when people refuse to look away. This pile of hope was the absolute blinding opposite of the man who had caused all this. Wade's sickness, his parasitic greed, had drained this family of everything. His addiction was a black hole that poisoned everyone it touched, a toxin that left children barefoot on a highway. Addiction and greed are toxins. If you stand against the kind of selfish behavior that abandons a family, show your support by liking this video. This ride was a stand against that selfishness, and that like button is your way of riding with them. We don't give this to Price, Doc said, his voice firm. We don't even give it to Delilah, not yet. We protect it. Reaper nodded. You're right. We set up a legal trust. Dr. Alani can be the co-signer. This money is for Delilah and those kids and nobody else. Not the state. Not us. And especially... He didn't need to finish the sentence. The local paper, the Nevada Herald, ran the story on their front page. Outlaw bikers, local heroes. The Guardian ride saves local family. The article, complete with a photo of the bikes flooding the town square, detailed the rescue, the fight with CPS, and the incredible $17,450 raised. Hundreds of miles away, in a Reno motel room that smelled of stale cigarettes and desperation, Wade Quinn stared at his phone. The glowing screen of an online poker site was open on his laptop, his balance at zero. An alert from a friend back home had linked him to the Herald story. You read it? His eyes skipped the parts about his wife's concussion, about his daughter's catatonic state. They landed on one number, $17,450. A slow, sick smile spread across his face. You did the math. That was more than he owed the loan sharks. That was enough to pay them off and get him back in the game. It was his money. They were his kids, his wife. The bikers. They were just keeping it warm for him. His hands, shaking with a gambler's anticipation, picked up his phone. He dialed a number he knew by heart, the one belonging to the enforcers. Yeah, it's me. Wade. He tried to sound casual, but his voice was tight with excitement. Funny story. Remember that money I owe you? Looks like my wife came into a little windfall. Yeah. 17 grand. He listened, the smile growing. No, she's got it. Well, some biker freaks think they've got it. They're all holed up at my house. The old ranch off 50, you remember the one? He took a shaky breath. You want what I owe you? Go get it. And bring your crew. I'd hurry before they spend it. He hung up. He had just pointed a crew of violent criminals at his own family. He'd let them do the dirty work. And then he'd waltz in to pick up the scraps. 3 days of relentless, grinding work had transformed the farmhouse. It was no longer a victim's home, it was a compound. The splintered doorway was gone, replaced by a steel frame door and a deadbolt that Ghost had tested himself. The scent of bleach and despair had been scoured away, replaced by the simmering aroma of Doc's chili. It was the first moment of quiet. The first time the Sentinels could actually sit on the reinforced porch, drink a cup of coffee, and just breathe. Zoe, the silent girl, had even sat at the clean kitchen table and, with a new box of crayons, drawn a picture of a large, lopsided bear. She'd silently handed it to Grizz, who, with a look of profound seriousness, had declared it a masterpiece and folded it into his vest. The $17,000 was secure, the trust legally filed. The immediate, suffocating pressure from Miss Price was off. The quiet was shattered by the buzz of Reaper's burner phone. The caller ID read, "Trap." Reaper stepped away from the porch, his voice low. Sal. What's up? Sal, the proprietor of the Sand Trap, a local dive bar where the Sentinels were a semi-welcome presence, sounded nervous. Reaper. I'm calling you as a courtesy. You were a skin around about that guy, the one from the paper? Wade Quinn. Reaper's spine went rigid. What about him? He's here, Sal whispered, his voice tinny. Been sitting at the end of my bar for an hour. Drinking, well, whiskey like it's water. He's alone, looks like 5 kinds of hell, but he's here. I don't want trouble, Reaper. He's muttering about his money and his kids. He say anything else? Reaper's mind was already in motion. No, just, he looks desperate. And desperate men are stupid. Just thought you should know. You did good, Sal. We appreciate it. We're not looking for trouble either, Reaper lied, his voice a smooth, reassuring rumble. Keep him there if you can. We'll handle it. He hung up and turned to his VP. Ghost. Chris. Wade's back. Ghost spat a stream of coffee onto the dirt. Wade? The father? What, he thinks he's gonna just waltz in here. He's at the sand trap. Alone, Reaper said. Drinking. Grizz, who had been cleaning his bike, stood. The sound of him cracking his knuckles was like firewood splitting. Good. Let's go. I got a few things to say to him. Hold up, Ghost said, his paranoid instincts flaring. It smells. He just shows up at a bar? Why not come here? Because he's a coward, Reaper reasoned, and it was a sound, logical conclusion. This was their consensus. Wade wasn't a warrior, he was a rat. He's a gambling addict, not a general. He ran when things got tough. He let thugs beat his wife. He's back because he's desperate, and Sal's right. Desperate men are stupid. He's probably trying to get drunk enough to come here and beg. This was their miscalculation. They saw the man but not the trap he was baiting. So what's the play? Grizz asked. We end this, Reaper said decisively. We've been playing by the system's rules. We'll use the system. He reached into his vest and pulled out a folded sheaf of papers. Sheriff Brody, incensed by the attack on Delilah and Nolan's testimony, had fast-tracked an emergency restraining order. This, Reaper slapped the papers against his hand, is our sword. We go there. Just us three. The president, the VP, the enforcer. A statement. We serve him this paper. We tell him face to face that he's done. That the money is in a trust he can't touch. That his family is under our protection. And that if he or any of his low-life friends come within 5 miles of this house, we won't be calling the cops. And the house? Ghost asked, his gaze drifting to Nolan, who was watching them through the window. Doc's in charge, Reaper commanded. He, Wrench, and the rest stay here. This place is a fortress. The kids are safe. The threat is there, he jabbed a finger toward town, not here. We're not leaving the kids undefended. We're taking the fight to the enemy. It's a quick run. In and out. 1 hour. Doc emerged from the kitchen, wiping his hands on a towel. Go. And it. We'll hold the line. 20 minutes later, 3 Harleys rumbled to a halt in the gravel lot of the sand trap. The bar was a windowless concrete box, its neon sign flickering pathetically. They pushed through the door and the bar went silent. The smell of stale beer and regret hung thick in the air. And there he was. At the far end of the bar, hunched over a glass, was Wade. He was exactly as they'd pictured. Pathetic. He was unshaven, his eyes twitchy, his shoulders slumped. He looked like a man who had been running for days. Reaper, Ghost, and Grizz fanned out. Grizz took the door. Ghost flanked the side. Reaper walked straight to the bar and sat on the stool next to Wade, leaving one empty seat between them. Wade flinched, his head snapping up. His eyes went wide with pure animal terror as he recognized Reaper. What do you want? He stammered. Reaper signaled Sal for a water. We're here for what you did, Wade. He slid the restraining order across the bar. You're done. Wade stared at the paper. A strange, oily smile crept onto his face, overriding the fear. Do you really think, he squeaked, that this was about paper? From the dark hallway by the restrooms, 4 men emerged. 2 were the enforcers Nolan had described. The other 2 were just big. Ghost's hand dropped. Grizz tensed. It wasn't a confrontation. It was an ambush. The air in the sand trap didn't just go silent, it evaporated. The jukebox, which had been wheezing out a scratchy classic rock tune, died mid-chord. The clack of a single pool ball from the back room was the last normal sound before a heavy, suffocating stillness flooded the space. Reaper didn't turn to look at the men who had emerged from the dark hallway by the restrooms. He watched them in the warped, grimy mirror behind the bar, next to the neon beer sign. 4 of them. But they weren't bikers. They were the kind of men hired for their size and their lack of conscience. Cheap jackets, dead eyes, and the relaxed posture of casual violence. 2 of them were instantly recognizable from Nolan's terrified description. One with a shaved head and a spiderweb tattoo on his neck, the other with an ugly, pale scar that pulled one side of his mouth into a permanent sneer. The other 2 were just solid walls of muscle. Ghost, to Reaper's left, went perfectly, unnaturally still. His hand, which had been resting on the bar, dropped to his side, his fingers splayed just above the hilt of the K-bar knife on his belt. Grizz by the door hadn't turned. But he'd stopped moving. He just stood there, a mountain of leather and denim blocking the only exit. But there were now 5 men standing between him and his president. The transformation in Wade was instant and horrifying. The pathetic, slumped-over drunk was gone. He straightened up and a manic, high-pitched giggle escaped his lips. The terror in his eyes was replaced by the glittering, wired-up arrogance of a man who believes he's just drawn a royal flush. "Oh man," Wade wheezed, wiping his mouth with the back of his hand. "You guys, you really thought?" He giggled again louder. "You thought you could just walk in here? With paper." He kicked his bar stool back, the sound of its legs scraping the floor a shriek in the quiet room. The stool toppled over with a crash. "Shut up, Wade," Reaper said, his voice a low, lethal hum. He still hadn't turned, his eyes locked on the mirror. "No, I don't think I will." Wade shot to his feet, his voice climbing in pitch. "You strolled in here all big and bad on your stupid bikes, thinking you're what? Heroes? You're thieves." "That's not your money," Reaper said, finally swiveling on his stool to face him. The 4 thugs fanned out, their movements practiced, creating a loose, inescapable semicircle. The bar's other 3 patrons looked like they were trying to melt into the peeling wallpaper. "It's my family," Wade shrieked, his face flushing a blotchy red. "My wife. My kids. That means it's my money. You raised it for them, and as their father I'm just collecting. So hand it over. All 17 grand. Or," he gestured wide to the enforcers, "these gentlemen are going to take it." Reaper allowed himself a small, cold smile. "You're even dumber than I thought. We knew you were a rat, Wade. The money's not in a bag. It's not in our pockets. It's gone." Wade's face fell. What do you mean gone?" "It's in a legal trust," Reaper said, savoring the words. "Filed yesterday. Ironclad. Signatures from Dr. Alani and my man document. It can only be used for Delilah and the kids. For medical bills. For the house. For their future." He leaned forward. "You can't touch it. Ever." The blood drained from Wade's face. He looked devastated. The enforcer with the scar stepped forward, his voice a gravelly rasp. "Is this true, Wade? You told us the money was here. You said it was easy." For a split second, pure panic flashed in Wade's eyes. He looked from the enforcer to Reaper. Then he started to laugh. It wasn't the manic giggle from before. This was a deep, ugly, genuine laugh that came from his gut. He laughed so hard he bent over, slapping his knee. "A trust?" he finally gasped, wiping a tear from his eye. "Oh, you are so stupid. You think I care about a trust? You bikers," Wade sneered, his voice dropping, his confidence surging back. "You're all muscle and chrome, no brains. You think this was about getting the money from you? This was about getting you away." Reaper's blood went cold. The pieces clicked into place with a horrifying, sickening snap. Ghost was right. It smelled. "You thought I came alone?" Wade mocked. "These guys," he gestured to the 4 thugs, "they're just half the party. The other half, they're at the house." The words hit Reaper like a physical blow. The air rushed from his lungs. This entire bar scene, the tip from Sal, who was undoubtedly terrified into making the call, Wade acting like a lone, pathetic drunk, it was all a lure. A brilliant, simple, and deadly trap. "What did you say?" Ghost took a single, dangerous step forward. "You heard me." Wade was beaming, his face alight with a twisted, manic pride. "I can't get the money from a trust, but you know who can? My wife, Delilah. All she has to do is sign the right papers. And my friends, they're very, very persuasive." The realization was a punch to the gut. He'd been outmaneuvered. He had split his club. He'd brought his VP and his enforcer, the club's primary muscle, on a fool's errand. He had left the farmhouse, the children, and a recovering woman guarded by, who? Doc, a medic. Wrench, a mechanic. The B-team. You set up your own family," Reaper said, his voice thick with a disbelief that was rapidly turning to rage. "I'm saving my family." Wade screamed, his composure finally cracking, revealing the desperate, cornered manipulator underneath. "Don't you get it? I owe these men. If I don't pay them, we're all dead. They'll burn the house down with them in it. You think you could just waltz in and take my family? You think you're better than me? Reaper saw him for what he was. A classic manipulator. A man who sets his own house on fire and then blames the firefighters for the smoke. He was willing to put his own wife and children in the direct line of fire of violent criminals, all to clean up his own catastrophic mess, and he was still trying to play the victim. We all know people like Wade. They twist the truth, they abandon their responsibilities, and they blame everyone else for the chaos they create. If you can't stand manipulators who play the victim, comment, "No more lies" below. Let them know we see right through them. By the time you get out of here, Wade sneered, my wife will be signing that trust over to me. You lose. The enforcer with the scar just cracked his knuckles, a sound like dry bones snapping. We get paid either way. We get the trust, or we take it out of your hides. Reaper met Ghost's eyes across the room. There was no plan. There was no time. There was only the trap snapping shut. Document Nolan. Zoe. They were at the house and they were alone. Grizz. Reaper roared. The door. Grizz didn't hesitate. He grabbed the nearest bar patron, a guy who weighed at least 200 pounds, and threw him at the two thugs nearest the exit as a human battering ram. The bar exploded. Ghost drove his K-bar knife deep into the wooden bar, grabbed the bar stool beside him, and swung it two-handed into the chest of the scar-faced enforcer. Bottles shattered. Men shouted. Reaper didn't go for Wade. He went for the bouncer nearest him, snatching a pool cue from the wall rack. He swung for the knees. He had to get back to his bike. He had to get back to the house. But there were 5 men and the fight had just begun. The sand trap didn't just erupt. It detonated. In the split second after Wade's horrifying reveal, Grizz, who was still by the door, didn't try to fight his way in. He became the exit. He grabbed the pool table nearest him and, with a roar that shook the beer bottles on the wall, flipped it on its side, creating a 5-foot-high barricade. 2 of the thugs charged him. It was like water hitting a mountain. Grizz caught the first man by the throat and the arm, using him as a 200-pound shield against the second. Back at the bar, Reaper and Ghost moved as one. Ghost kicked his bar stool into the legs of the scar-faced enforcer, while Reaper brought the heavy end of his pool cue down on the wrist of a thug reaching inside his jacket. The sound of the bone snapping was a wet, percussive crack. Wade shrieked, scrambling backward like a crab, knocking over tables. Get them. Don't let them leave. Kill them. Kill them all. The bar devolved into a chaos of grunts, shattering glass, and the thud of fists on flesh. Reaper, Ghost, and Grizz were a disciplined triangle of violence. They were outnumbered, but they were sentinels. They fought with the brutal, economic efficiency of men who had done this before. Reaper was a brawler, pure power. Ghost was a shadow, all sharp elbows and precise, damaging strikes. Grizz was a wall, absorbing blows that would have felled a tree and hitting back with twice the force. But they were still outnumbered. The enforcers were hired muscle, not just barflies. They fought dirty. One of them broke a bottle, jabbing the jagged edge at Ghost, who barely parried it with a chair leg. Reaper was grappling with 2 at once, his breath coming in ragged bursts. He was pinned against the bar, the spiderweb-tattooed man's forearm crushing his windpipe. And in the middle of this chaos, a high-pitched, tinny sound cut through the noise. Ringtone. It was coming from Ghost's belt. Reaper. Ghost roared, kicking his attacker in the gut to create a half-second of space. He was trapped behind the pool table, fumbling for the phone. It's Doc. Reaper, his vision starting to gray at the edges, got a surge of adrenaline. He heaved upward, throwing the man off him and into the bar's mirror, which exploded in a shower of glass. Answer it. Ghost grabbed the phone, his thumb bloody as he smeared the accept icon. He hit the speaker. Doc. We're... Doc's voice, thin and terrified, screamed through the phone's tiny speaker, loud enough for Reaper to hear over the brawl. Reaper. Ghost. They're here. A car. 4 of them. They just pulled up. They're not the cops. Wait, send another team. They're at the door. They're at the door. The blood in Reaper's veins turned to ice. It was true. The full, horrific scope of the trap was laid bare. This fight wasn't the main event. It was the diversion. Doc. Reaper bellowed, smashing his fist into the last standing thug's face. Lock it down. Lock it all down. We're coming. No time. Doc's voice shrieked, followed by a sound like splintering wood. They're through the door. The call ended in a crash of static and a scream. No, Reaper roared. The fight wasn't about winning anymore. It was about escape. Grizz, the door. Now. Grizz grabbed the enforcer he was holding and threw him, bodily, through the bar's front plate glass window. The explosion of glass and the man's scream were the signal. Ghost vaulted over the pool table and Reaper grabbed Wade, who was cowering by the jukebox. You. Reaper was so full of rage he could barely speak. He had a choice. End Wade. Or save his family. He threw Wade to the floor. This is on you. He ran for the door. Meanwhile, at the farmhouse, 2 minutes earlier, Doc was at the stove stirring a massive pot of chili. The real food, the new appliances, the clean surfaces, it was a home. Wrench, the club's mechanic, was at the table helping Nolan with his math homework. Zoe was on the floor, surrounded by crayons, humming. The other 3 sentinels were on the porch, a quiet, watchful presence. It was peaceful. Then Wrench, who was facing the window, looked up. Hey Doc, we expecting company? Doc looked. A black, windowless sedan, not a cop car, was rumbling up their long, private driveway. Fast. Doc didn't hesitate. He wasn't Reaper, but he was a sentinel. Wrench. Red. Envil. Porch. Now. Now. The bikers on the porch were already on their feet. The sedan screeched to a halt in the yard. 4 men, dressed identically in dark clothes, spilled out. They were professionals. They moved with a chilling, fluid purpose. They were the real team. The lead enforcer, a tall man with a dead face, didn't posture. We're here for the woman, Delilah, and the kids. This house is under the protection of the road sentinels, Doc said, his voice surprisingly steady, though his heart was hammering. Get back in your car and leave. The man just smiled. We're not here to talk. He signaled his men. One of them pulled a tire iron. Another pulled a crowbar. This wasn't a fight. This was an invasion. Inside, Doc yelled, barricade. They slammed the new steel door. The thud of Grizz's deadbolt sliding home was a reassuring sound. A second later, the first boom hit the door as the enforcers used a piece of salvaged lumber as a battering ram. Nolan. Zoe. Doc screamed. The pantry. Go. Go. Do not come out. Nolan grabbed his sister's hand and pulled her into the pantry they had once hidden in, shutting the door. Delilah, who had come running from her room, was standing in the kitchen, her face pale. But this wasn't the broken, catatonic woman they had found. Her eyes weren't empty. They were blazing. Boom. The steel doorframe shuddered, the wood around it splintering. They're coming through. Wrench yelled, grabbing a heavy cast-iron skillet from the stove. The doorframe splintered, buckled, and burst inward. The 4 enforcers spilled into the living room, fanning out. Where's the money, old man? The leader snarled, advancing on Doc. The 5 B-team bikers met them. It was a desperate, brutal fight in the small living room. Wrench swung the skillet, connecting with a thug's shoulder. Red and Anvil, the 2 porch guards, tackled one man, but the other 2 were too fast. They were focused. One of them, the leader, saw the pantry door. Kids are in there. She'll talk if we got the kids. He shoved past Doc, making a beeline for the pantry. He grabbed the handle. Get. A voice, low and shaking with rage, cut him off. Out. The enforcer turned. Delilah was standing right behind him. She was not the victim on the floor. She was not the terrified woman from the clinic. She was a mother, backed into a corner, her children on the other side of a thin wooden door. Of my house. She swung the heavy, cast-iron skillet she grabbed from Doc, a 2-handed, desperate, powerful arc. It connected with the side of the enforcer's head with a sound like a melon dropped on concrete. A thunk that echoed through the room. His eyes rolled back in his head. He didn't make a sound. He just collapsed out cold at her feet. The other 3 thugs froze. The fight stopped. They stared at their leader, then at Delilah, who was breathing heavily, the skillet still raised, ready to swing again. It was in this exact, frozen second of disbelief that the world was filled with 2 new sounds. The first was the thundering, approaching roar of 3 Harley-Davidson engines, coming in fast. The second was the rising wail of police sirens. The enforcers looked at each other. Their leader was down. Their muscle at the bar was gone. And the cavalry, both leather and blue, was arriving. Forget it, one of them yelled. It's a bust. They scrambled, grabbing their unconscious leader by the arms, dragging him out of the ruined doorway. They piled into their sedan just as Sheriff Brody's first cruiser, followed by the blinding triple headlights of Reaper, Ghost, and Grizz, careened into the driveway. Reaper vaulted off his bike before it had even stopped, his face a mask of primal terror. Nolan. He burst into the house, his eyes scanning the wreckage, the broken furniture, the struggling bikers. He saw the pantry door closed. He saw Delilah shaking but standing, the skillet in her hand. He saw the thugs drop tire iron on her floor. The pantry door creaked open. Nolan and Zoe peeked out. Reaper staggered, his knees weak with relief. He looked at Delilah, who met his gaze, her knuckles white on the skillet's handle. "I told them," she whispered, "to get out of my house." Reaper looked at the mess, at his bloody but standing crew, at the woman who had just saved her own family. "Yeah, you did," he said, his voice rough. "You damn well did." The standoff was over. They had held the line. The farmhouse driveway was a sea of flashing red and blue. Reaper, Ghost, and Grizz had arrived just as Sheriff Brody's cruisers slid to a halt, cutting off the enforcer's sedan. The fight was over. At the bar, deputies, tipped off by a panicked Sal, had already stormed the sand trap, finding the bloodied but victorious bikers and the 5 thugs they had subdued. The final, most satisfying click was the sound of handcuffs ratcheting shut around Wade Quinn's wrists. He'd been found cowering in the bar's walk-in cooler, dragged out by Grizz. You can't." Wade blubbered, his face a mask of pathetic terror. "They're my family. You stole my family." Reaper, his lips split and his knuckles raw, stood inches from his face. "You don't have a family. You just have a dad." Wade is led away in cuffs, a man who abandoned his kids, betrayed his wife, and tried to steal their one chance at a future. He was a black hole of selfishness, a deadbeat who would rather see his family destroyed than take responsibility. The world has enough deadbeats. If you believe in taking responsibility and protecting families, hit subscribe and join the Sentinels. Only someone who sides with Wade wouldn't. 6 months later, Miss Price sat at a clean kitchen table in a house she barely recognized. The walls were painted. Sunlight streamed through new windows, illuminating a framed drawing by Zoe on the wall. Delilah, her eyes clear and her hair healthy, placed a cup of coffee in front of her. She was now the assistant manager at the local diner. From the yard, they could hear Nolan laughing as Grizz and Wrench taught him how to tune a bike engine. "I've never," Miss Price said, her voice lacking its clinical edge, "seen a case like this. Ever." She looked at the file, then at Delilah. "Your therapy reports are exemplary. The trust fund is secure. The children are, by every metric, thriving." She pulled out a single form and, with a decisive, firm stroke, signed her name. "Case closed, Miss Quinn. You're free." Delilah covered her mouth, tears of relief streaming down her face. Miss Price stood, looking out the window at the bikers in the yard. "You proved me wrong, Mr. Stone. You all did." The story's end wasn't a quiet moment. It was a roar. The town square, once a place that shunned the Sentinels, was packed. A massive banner hung between 2 poles. Inaugural Road Sentinels, Guardian Ride, 4 families on the Forgotten Road. It was their new nonprofit. Dr. Alani and Sheriff Brody stood on the sidelines, cheering. Even Miss Price was there, a rare, small smile on her face. Reaper sat on his Harley, the engine thrumming. But he wasn't alone. Seated in front of him, hands proudly on the tank, was Nolan, wearing a new custom-painted helmet. On the sidewalk, Delilah held Zoe. The little girl, once silent and lost, was now a vibrant, chattering mascot. She wore a tiny, perfect custom-made leather vest with a sentinel patch. "Go, Uncle Reaper. Go, Nolan," she shrieked, waving. Reaper met Ghost's eyes. They weren't outlaws. They were guardians. He revved his engine and the new convoy rolled out, a thunderous promise to the world. They would be the ones to ride back into the darkness.